Well, hello, everyone. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian whistleblower, and it is Monday. So that must mean that it's time for the Apostle Paul Antichrist teaching series looking into the fact, I believe, and have proven for many years and will continue to prove, that the so-called Apostle Paul hijacked it, co-opted the original Yeshua message and turned it into a fear and guilt-based control matrix under which we are still enslaved. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. We're breaking this down word by word, sometimes page by page out of my book, Apostle Paul Antichrist, available at jeffreydaugherty.com, christianwhistleblower.com. That little writing says Daugherty delivers innovation, talent, and bravery. George Norrie, Coast to Coast AM. So let's get right into it. And before we do, I wanted to show you the Christian Whistleblower website. This is jeffreydaugherty.com, christianwhistleblower.com. And if you notice, we do have on here all of the teachings. On Monday, it's Apostle Paul Antichrist. That's what you're looking at. Tuesday, Diamond New Testament commentary. Wednesday, Book of Revelation. Thursday, Yeshua Unscripted, the original teachings. Friday, Nag Hammadi. Saturday, the secret teachings of all ages. Sunday, ISIS Unveiled and NCK Live, which is our weekly fellowship. And you'll find all these on my YouTube, Jeffrey Daugherty YouTube. Just look that up. Plus, we have wildcard broadcasts, various days and times. The 11th Hour Messenger Live. We should probably make that 11th Hour Messengers because I have a lot of different people on there. And then the Christian Whistleblower, which is our show, and Paranormal Trip coming up very quickly. So you can go and find, and these are all playlists. You can find the entire teachings and studies, and you can get deep. You can unindoctrinate yourself. And we also right now have a sale on our books, $2.50, except for this book. This is the brand new one, Eat the Pain, Spirit Cooking, the Eucharist, and Communion. The shocking connections between spirit cooking, the Eucharist, and communion. This one's $5, but all the rest of them, some of them have been as much as $12. They're all on sale for just $2.50. Our two Christmas books, the Mandela Effect, Confessions of an Exorcist. This is the hardback. This would be the ebook. Diamond New Testament, Apostle Paul Antichrist that we're talking about, Final Message of the Last Apostle. All of these books, Serpents and Doves, Spiritual Wisdom, Rocket Man, all available to you for just $2.50. So go ahead and take advantage of that and continue to take advantage of jeffreydaugherty.com as well, and continue to take advantage of our YouTube. Let's just show you what our YouTube, well, you're on the YouTube, so you know exactly what it looks like. So let's go ahead and get into the teaching today. And this is kind of an interesting one because when I wrote the book, I wrote this book in 2013. We're about to hit 2017, so it's at least 3, maybe 4 years ago I wrote this book. I wrote this book so long ago that that's what I looked like when I wrote it. Short hair, spiky, no facial hair. That's funny. But at any rate, we wrote the book then, and when I wrote that book, I believed that there was actually a crucifixion that took place in Jerusalem like what we see when we see it presented in media and how it's presented in the New Testament. At that time, I believed that Yeshua had been crucified. I want to make a statement that's a rather strong statement, but I think it's a true statement. Anyone that still believes the same thing and still teaches the same thing word for word that they did 3 or 4 years ago probably isn't worth listening to. Because in 3 or 4 years, you should find some new things. You should discover some new nuances at least. You should discover some new things about the things you're teaching about and the things that you're showing. And in my study over the last 3 or 4 years, and people, again, want to scoff, oh, how could you have 100,000 hours of Bible study? Because this is what I do all day, every day, and have been doing it for 35 years. It's my hobby. I used to play some hockey. I haven't done that in quite a while, but further research and further study has convinced me, kicking and screaming, I hated to admit it. It was one of those last sacred cows that I had to free myself from. But I have to realize now that in all likelihood, the crucifixion was a false flag at best and a fairy tale at worst. It was made up. It did not happen, especially in the way that we have seen it happen. And Jeffrey, how can you say that the crucifixion never happened? Well, let me show you a little bit of stuff here. Let's show you some wisdom. This is not from Apostle Paul, Antichrist. This is from Final Message of the Last Apostle, one of my other books. And I just want to show it to you because it talks about the crucifixion itself. And a cold, hard, objective historical fact is that, and this was very, very hard for me to accept, there's absolutely no secular, credible evidence for the crucifixion. A biblical scholar, J.D. Crossman, admits that attempts to document historical Yeshua amount to an academic embarrassment. And even the most ardent supporters can point to only 3 cryptic extra-biblical resources. Raphael Lataster, tutor in religious studies at Sydney University, says, little can be gleaned from the few non-biblical and non-Christian sources, with only the Roman scholar Josephus and the historian Tacitus having any reasonable claim to be writing within 100 years of the life of Jesus and or Yeshua. Do you understand that? They weren't writing. At least those guys weren't writing. There was only one person that wrote within 100 years of Yeshua. In fact, wrote while Yeshua and Jesus, if he were real, were in Jerusalem, and we'll get to that. And they're sparse accounts. They're shrouded in controversy. Many parts have obviously been changed by Christian scribes because the manuscripts were preserved by Christians. Both these authors, Josephus and Tacitus, were born after Jesus died and probably would have received their information from Christians. And the oddity that centuries go by before Christian apologists start reverencing them. Now, I have added a couple of documents to this that I think are worthy of consideration. Number one is the Mara Bar Serapion letter, AD 73. But of these sources, Tacitus is generally considered to be the best and most credible. But the most important thing is that there is a complete lack of silence by the most credible of scholars. And this is what Tacitus said in full, and this is considered to be the best evidence. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty, crucifixion, during the time of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. That's it. That's the best extra-biblical proof of the crucifixion of Yeshua/Jesus. But there's some problems with this. For one, Tacitus was an imperial writer. He never would have referred to Jesus as Christ or anointed. Also, Pilate was not a procurator. He was a prefect. Tacitus would have known and would never have made that mistake. The fact, folks, is that the best evidence for the crucifixion of Yeshua is likely doctored or forged. There's no extra biblical evidence for a crucifixion. And the writer Philo, who lived in and around Jerusalem the entire time Yeshua/Jesus was there, had not a single word to say about the magnificent crucifixion or resurrection events. Now, if it had been the great grand show trial that the New Testament tells us about, this guy would have written about it. He would have had to. It would have been a great moment in the history of the Judeans, which is what he wrote, a book called The History of the Judeans. But he didn't say one word about it. Not one word about it. The only proof of the crucifixion is in the New Testament. And for us to say the Bible's true because the Bible says it's true is the worst that's the worst scholarship that is possible. What I've been forced to believe, it's one of two things. Number one, it was completely made up. And the Apostle Paul did say that he made up the crucifixion, and we'll get into that. That's in another study. That's not part of this study. But Paul did, and we may bring it into this study because it's relevant. Paul admitted that he made up the Bethlehem story. Paul admitted that he was the first person to preach about the crucifixion of Jesus. So it's likely that he made it up. That's why it's not recorded anywhere in secular history. That's why Philo did not write about it. That's why the only references to the crucifixion are smuggled in by Christian writers writing centuries after the event would have occurred. It pains me to say that's the most likely scenario and the most likely of events. However, I do believe, based upon both biblical and parabiblical or extra-biblical writings from the Gnostics, from the New Testament itself, that it is likely that there was a false flag and that the twin of Yeshua, and we're going to get into this probably in the next broadcast, Yeshua's twin was kidnapped, put on trial, but it wasn't a big show trial, else it was small enough that Philo did not take notice of it, and it was probably just an inside job, very quick, very easy, very fast. So they kidnapped a guy that looked like Yeshua, put him on trial, and this again goes a long way to explaining why Pilate was very less than pleased. And then they crucified him, took him off the cross before he was dead, faked a resurrection event. And there's a lot of spiritual, Gnostic, New Testament, and Essene information that points to that being true. However, I must say, strictly anthropologically, historically, even even by way of archaeologically, that the crucifixion cannot be proven by empirical evidence. It just can't be proven. I still believe in my blink, I still believe in my gut that there was a false flag crucifixion event, and we'll get into the reasons why on our next broadcast. But the plain truth is that you cannot prove the crucifixion from empirical historical sources. And from empirical historical sources that should have mentioned it, it's not there. So as a scholar, we are required to say, look, there's no evidence of it. And if we call ourselves a scholar and say, oh, we believe the Bible because the Bible says it's true, then we're really not scholars. We are caricatures of scholars. We're stupid idiots if we're willing to say that. Because the Bible has been proven to be full of some diamonds, but a whole lot of dung. The fact is that the information that is put forward as the best evidence of the crucifixion of Jesus or of Yeshua, as I formerly believed it to be, it's either doctored or forged. So it pains me to say that the historical evidence is there was no crucifixion, although I do believe, and I'm telling you right now, this is not from any evidence, it's just from my beliefs. It's not from any empirical historical evidence. It is my belief that there was a false flag crucifixion event perpetrated to launch the false religion of Paul, Nero, and that is what this whole thing grew out of. Now, we'll talk more about that on the next program. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower, encouraging you to tune in each week for Apostle Paul, Antichrist, as we study the fact that Paul hijacked the message of Yeshua and turned it into a fear and guilt-based matrix. I am Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower, and this is all part of our attempt to help you unindoctrinate yourself.